We've been running virtual groups for more than 5 years, and this was mainly for parents and carers. But what COVID has taught us is that these groups can be done for patients who are having chemotherapy. A lot of them need education groups, follow up groups, and again, they will not be able to meet physically because of the virus and social isolation and social distancing. So, this is something that we are now looking into and have started groups in physiotherapy, speech and language, a lot of rehab groups for pulmonary cases of COVID, as you were hearing about the pulmonary complications earlier, neuro rehab groups, and mental health groups. So we know change is inevitable, and how do we make sure that we bring the right change moving forward? We've got a very robust evaluation that we set from day one when we started in March, and this is based on a quality improvement approach. It's very different to research because what it gives is you can improvise as you go along. You capture live data, you do PDSA cycles where you plan, do, study, act. So you get a chance to change as you go. You don't stick with one hypothesis. We've done surveys, had about 25,000 survey responses from the public, professionals, and patients talking about their experience, and we have made changes. We have team retrospectives because, again, all of us are working remotely to give a chance to feel people are supported, providing them that space to talk about their experience and how we can improve. We are collaborating with academics and trying to publish the evidence that we are generating so that we can inform services as we move forward. This is the driver diagram that's usually used in a quality improvement. In terms of data, as I said, we've saved about 1.8 million miles, 38 tons of carbon footprint, 60,000 travel time, more than 75% prevention of face to face. And when I say face to face, when you think about it, it's not only the risk of infection, but also the use of PPE, which at one stage we had huge shortages, and there was no way we would be able to cater to the needs of health professionals. Similarly, I would encourage to have a look at our website. We've got loads of resources and tools, publications, and toolkits that may be helpful. Thinking about the new normal and moving forward, what have we learned from COVID? What can we take forward to change the way we do things, to make things better? As I mentioned, Kuch Toolkit, which is our Ready, Steady, Go telepsychiatry toolkit, was developed last year and has now been endorsed by the Royal College of Psychiatrists in Wales. And I've put the link in there and happy to share my slides afterwards. We talk about the main Kuch principles, and in order to set up a telepsychiatry service, it's getting the right team together, it's working with each other. It's important to have a leader, but it's also important to have the voice of everybody in the team, including the patients and the family members. Because if the patients don't engage, you can be sure this is not going to work. Safeguarding is very important, especially when we think about remote consultations, because a lot of our mental health patients may have experiences of trauma and abuse, especially when you think about the elderly. If there is any evidence of abuse and if they are making a call from their home, more than likely there'll be other family members listening to them. A lot of our young people who've got history of abuse or probably are still living with the abuser, how do you make sure that these conversations can happen in a confidential manner? So it's important to have that private space. It's important to make sure that other people are not hovering around and listening to them. And if there are any concerns, then obviously, this may need to be put on hold and you may need to see the person face to face. So it's really important to choose who's suitable. If somebody has a severe eating disorder, somebody's got dementia with delirium super added and may need a physical examination, may need bloods, then obviously video consultation may not be the way forward. Making sure that the making sure that you do a trial run, and it may be something that's done prior to the appointment. Technical support, satisfaction, and evaluation. It's really, really important to have that in place so that you can generate the right sort of evidence and share it with a wider audience so that moving forward we know what works. How does face to face compare to virtual? Does it take longer? Which cases does face to face work better? Which cases do virtual work better? And how do we embed this and make it sustainable? As I said, the ready phase is more about getting the technical equipment, getting the licenses. Again, headsets, webcams were like gold dust when COVID started because everybody was going virtual at work, at home. but also making sure that you're clinically as a team ready, defining a space, ideally a designated room where you can close the door, put a sign outside saying do not disturb so that people don't walk in and out. The last thing the patient wants is somebody walking in and out of the room, or you having multiple people in the room chatting while you are having the session with the patient. Having the right equipment, the right platform. Again, platforms like Zoom, Facebook, WhatsApp have been used, but it's being mindful of the information governance principles and cybersecurity. And that's why you need to make sure the platform is 100% safe and secure. Training was very important, and FICA is a
You are
principle. And again, it fits very well with our Indian principle, because when you eat together, you train together, you tend to be much more productive because everybody is satisfied. So this just shows the workflow, getting the process right, and this will vary from service to service. The set phase, deciding who's the lead, the clinical champions, the coach champions, who will do the training, make sure people get the confidence, because there will always be people who are anxious to use it. Although COVID has made all of us, without choice having to do this, and getting the right admin support so that things are in place. You have your trial runs done beforehand. Again, I cannot emphasize enough about the risk and safeguarding principle. Having a contingency plan in case video appointment doesn't work. Get the phone number so that I can call you back straight away. Get the person's address, because just in case the person says, I'm planning to take a overdose, I'm planning to harm myself, you can get help in place. And having a safety net, having a plan so that after the conversation, if things worsen, call up this number, or if things worsen, contact this person. The legal and ethical considerations. And again, consent is really important. What happens if somebody lacks capacity? Then in that case, it may be that you have to abort the video appointment and move face to face, being mindful of that. So it's just being mindful, especially in the elderly, especially in the confused. How do you proceed and when do you decide not to? And documentation. It's really, really important with the law changing, with legal implications. It's not going to be long where you will be challenged. And if it's not written, it hasn't happened. And evaluation and satisfaction. And once you are ready to go in the go phase, set up and make a start. The more you do it, the more confidence you get. There will be glitches, but usually, practice makes us perfect. As I said, have a look at the toolkits. We've got various toolkits on our website. We've got useful resources, videos showing how can you do an assessment of somebody with muscular pain, how can you do assessment with somebody in respiratory distress, of a swelling, of a rash. So there are useful resources there. And I cannot emphasize enough, whatever you do, collect data, evaluate. We need the evidence. We've never been in this situation before, and let's hope we never come across a pandemic again in our lifespan. But for generations to come, if we have the evidence, we can share with them what we learned and embed it in the way we deliver care in the future. Something that I had never imagined when I took the role on as the national clinical lead in March was that I would be supporting the connections between patients and families. For some of them, it was an intensive care to see their family members. For others, it was just to say the final goodbye to some of their family members. I'll share a short video. It may be upsetting, but for me, in the middle of the night when I was woken up at 2 o'clock to make sure those video appointments were working in intensive care, it just made me feel how important it was to have those human connections, which often, are more important than anything we as health professionals can do.
Very, very challenging for us. It's not normal circumstances. It's really, really difficult. However, there is a light and a bit of positivity in there. We've had a lot of iPads donated to us, and this helps them. So our patient who is extubated, hopefully in the morning we can ring his wife and they can have a little video chat. Robert! Mom! Robert! How's your wife on the phone? Bob? Bob, how is her? He looks peaceful. Can you hear? Mom, I love you. Love you. So I'll explain to you now the things that you've got, so you know what all of the bits of support are and the bits of kit. So that tube there goes into his neck, and it pulled the tracheostomy, and that helps with his breathing. Okay, so this is all very normal, and believe it or not, it's very normal for people to be sleepy like this as well. Oh, bless him. He's doing well. He's doing well. We've made lots of progress.
I was in the situation for the first time the other day where I phoned a family and said, unfortunately, your loved one is going to die. And I thought to myself at the time, what on earth can I do to make this vaguely human? So I spoke to the daughter of this person and I said, I don't know whether this is going to sound like the most barbaric thing ever or whether it's something you would entertain, but we can possibly video call the end of life. And she actually said, oh God, that would be great. At least I would feel like I could be there in some way. So we prepared everything and we made contact via video conferencing, and she saw the face of her parent and she said what she wanted to say, what a fantastic parent they'd been, and all the things she wanted to say to him but wouldn't be in a position to. And when she said what she wanted to say, we turned off the various vasopressor agents, etc., and amended the alarm settings so that the buzzers didn't keep going off to interrupt the end of life experience. And it was very much like it would have been had she been.
For me, this video just highlights that, you know, we may be doctors, but at the end of the day, we are human beings, and it's really important to be a good human being. And I still get emotional when I see this, but it just sums up what we do and how important it is. So thank you very much. That's the detail of our website. And thanks once again for giving me this opportunity to share my experience.
Thank you, Dr. Ahuja. I think it is quite emotional, as you rightly said. But on the other hand, we really understand the different settings that this potential service can be utilized. And definitely, it's great to know the principles of video consultation service and how to set up a service in your own environment. So, really great and very useful information. I don't see there are any questions to you, but I just want to make a comment from the presentation. Yes, it sounds very great, and we would love to introduce a service when we get an opportunity to. However, as you probably would understand, there are significant differences in the way the healthcare is delivered in UK as well as in India. So there are a lot of hurdles and barriers to cross through to initiate a setup. But COVID gave an opportunity, really, from private practitioners' point of view. Yes, many practitioners are utilizing this video consultation services right now. But unfortunately, on the other hand, it is the patients and their family members, they find it very difficult to accept from what we have seen locally. Hopefully the trend will change in the future. And they were actually asking, like, when this will end, when we can come and see you directly, will you give an appointment? So no matter whether they have a phone in their hand, no matter whether they have the internet connection, they can connect to the practitioner anytime. But still, it is a face they want to see and kind of get reassured with. So that's my comment. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Hopefully one day will come where we will have an opportunity to.
I just wanted to give some comments, because one of the reasons why we selected this topic as well is because we need to go futuristic as well. And we have an experience of doing telemedicine in our foundation itself. And we know that, we provide services at places where there are no doctors, and we did a costing factor, and we realized for a population of around 1,500, for a village population of around 1,500 members, the cost saving for the village on a per monthly basis is around 3 lakhs. And this is a service that is welcomed by most of our villagers, in spite of the fact that they were told that this service may be run by students of 9th standard. I mean, there is a break in reality between what we think is a service or something that would make a difference and what people think they require. That slide on that swing part was so beautiful. It brought out that very well. Okay, we think this is what they require, but what they want is very different, because every time they move out to a service which is around 7 kilometers away, they spend approximately 850 rupees per day. And that is what makes most of our villages not go for immediate care. This is what we have realized, and we are now opening up such centers. Basically, they are kiosks, and it's doing wonderfully well, I can assure you. We have a working model at a village called as Vadavalli, around 35 kilometers from Coimbatore, and I presume this can be replicated at various other places, and it is important for medical colleges to get liaised to such facilities, because that's one of the ways by which medical colleges can get more patients, because that will give them the confidence that this hospital is really interested in my care. You know, we can adopt a similar model at various places. This is my personal feeling and comment.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ramachandran. I think we're coming to the end of this session 4. So once again, I thank both the speakers for spending your valuable time with us and really sharing your experiences. Thank you very much.